Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. In my early 30s, I packed up my life and moved to a bustling metropolis, determined to kickstart my career and make a name for myself. Money was incredibly tight, but I was brimming with optimism about my future prospects. During my job hunt, I stumbled upon a promising opportunity at a small tech startup called Innotech. Instead of offering me the position outright, the CEO, Sarah Thompson, proposed a 2-day trial period. If it was a good fit, they'd hire me. If not, they'd compensate me for my time. Funds were so scarce that I couldn't even justify spending money on bus fare. I ended up walking an hour each way to reach their office, my worn-out sneakers barely holding together. I poured my heart and soul into those 2 days, working diligently and showcasing my skills. Despite my efforts, it wasn't the right fit. When it came time to discuss payment, Sarah's demeanor changed. "Look," she said, leaning back in her ergonomic chair, "I know we mentioned compensation, but setting you up in our payroll system for just 2 days is a logistical nightmare. Can't you just be grateful for the experience you've gained?" Her dismissive attitude left a bitter taste in my mouth. I was furious, desperately needing that money, but I bit my tongue. As a newcomer trying to establish myself, I couldn't risk being labeled as difficult in such a tight-knit industry. However, I made a silent vow that someday, somehow, I would even the score with Sarah Thompson. Eventually, I landed a solid position that blossomed into a thriving career. Yet, I never forgot about Sarah and Innotech, keeping tabs on their progress over the years. There were moments when I contemplated petty acts of revenge, but I always held back, waiting for the right opportunity. Fast forward 15 years, and I found myself in a senior executive role at Tech Giant, a major player in the industry. We were known for our lucrative contracts and partnerships with smaller firms. As fate would have it, a significant project came up in Innotech's area of expertise, and I was heading the procurement team. The bidding process was extensive and costly for the participating firms, structured in multiple stages to minimize unnecessary expenses. When Innotech's exploratory bid landed on my desk, I couldn't help but smile. They weren't the perfect fit, but they were qualified enough to proceed. I guided them through each stage, knowing full well the amount of time and resources they were investing. It was a risky move on my part. If they ended up being the best choice, I'd have to put my personal feelings aside and award them the contract. Thankfully, when the final proposals came in, another firm slightly edged out Innotech. Normally, I wouldn't be the one to deliver the news, but I volunteered for the task, savoring my moment of long-awaited retribution. When I called Sarah, she had no recollection of our brief encounter years ago. I kept my tone professional as I delivered the verdict. "Sarah, we were genuinely impressed with Innotech's proposal," I began, barely containing my satisfaction. "However, it's just not the right fit for us at this time. I know you must be disappointed, but think of the valuable exposure you've gained to our selection process." I couldn't bring myself to parrot her exact words from 15 years ago, but the irony wasn't lost on me. "I understand," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with disappointment. "We put a lot of work into that proposal. Is there any feedback you can provide for future opportunities?" "I'm afraid we don't provide detailed feedback on unsuccessful bids," I responded, echoing her past dismissiveness, "but I'm sure you'll find the experience invaluable moving forward." As I ended the call, I did a quick mental calculation. Innotech must have invested at least 300 hours into their proposal. Considering my original 16 hours of unpaid work, plus 15 years of interest, I'd say we were finally even. The next one is an entitled people story. I'd always dreamed of owning a piece of beachfront property. After years of saving and planning, I finally bought a beautiful plot right on the coast. It was perfect. Stunning views, private beach access, the works. I was over the moon and couldn't wait to start building my dream home. But my excitement was short-lived. Just a week after closing on the property, I drove out to check on things and got the shock of my life. There was a brand new fence cutting right across my land, blocking off a huge chunk of the beachfront. I was stunned. Who would have the audacity to just fence off someone else's property? As I stood there gaping at this monstrosity, a woman in her 50s with a "can I speak to the manager" haircut came marching up to me. "Can I help you?" she demanded, hands on her hips. Yeah, what's with this fence on my property?" I asked. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Your property? I don't think so. This beachfront has belonged to my family for generations. I'm just securing what's rightfully mine." I was floored by her arrogance. "Ma'am, I literally just bought this plot last week. I have the deed and everything. You can't just fence off land that isn't yours." "Well, I've never seen you around here before," she sniffed. "My family has lived here for decades. This beach access is ours." "Living nearby doesn't give you the right to take my land," I exclaimed. "You need to take this fence down immediately." "I most certainly will not," she huffed. "Now get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. "Lady, you are the one trespassing. This is my land that I paid for. You're the one who needs to leave." "We'll just see about that," she said with a smug smirk. Then she turned on her heel and marched off. I was livid. Who did this entitled Karen think she was? There was no way I was letting her steal my beachfront. As soon as I got home, I called my real estate lawyer to explain the situation. He was as baffled as I was. "She has absolutely no right to do that," he assured me. "Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out quickly." True to his word, my lawyer sprang into action. He did a thorough title search to confirm there were no easements or claims on the property. Then he sent Karen a strongly worded cease and desist letter, ordering her to remove the fence within 48 hours or face legal consequences. I was nervous about how she'd respond, but I didn't have to wait long to find out. The very next day, I got an irate phone call. "How dare you sick your lawyer on me?" Karen screeched. "I'll have you know my husband is a very important man in this town. We have connections. You don't want to mess with us." I stayed calm. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to mess with anyone. I simply want you to remove the illegal fence from my property. The property records clearly show I'm the rightful owner." "Those records must be wrong," she insisted. "My family has used that beach for years. We have a right to it." "Using a beach doesn't make it yours," I explained patiently. "And putting up a fence on land you don't own is illegal. Please just take it down so we can avoid any further issues." "Never," she declared. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. We'll see who really owns that land." I sighed as she hung up on me. Clearly, this wasn't going to be resolved easily, but I wasn't about to back down. Over the next few days, it was non-stop drama. Karen's husband showed up at my house, puffing out his chest and trying to intimidate me into backing off. Then she started spreading rumors around town that I was trying to steal her family's legacy. She even had some of her cronies from the country club come harass me. But I stood firm. My lawyer assured me we were 100% in the right legally. He filed for an emergency injunction to have the fence removed. The day of the hearing arrived. I was a bundle of nerves as we entered the courtroom. Karen and her husband were there with their lawyer shooting me dirty looks. The judge reviewed all the evidence, property records, surveys, photos of the illegal fence. Karen's lawyer tried to argue about historic use and adverse possession, but it was clear he was grasping at straws. In the end, the judge ruled firmly in my favor. He ordered Karen to remove the fence within 24 hours and pay all my legal fees. He also warned her that any further encroachment would result in steep fines. Karen's face turned bright red. She looked like she was about to explode, but there was nothing she could do. The next day, I drove out to the property, half expecting the fence to still be there. But to my relief, it was gone. My beautiful beachfront was clear once again. As I stood there admiring the view, I heard the roar of an engine. A flashy convertible came speeding down the road and screeched to a halt. It was Karen. She got out and stormed over to me. "This isn't over," she snarled. "My family has lived here for generations. We won't let some outsider push us around." I stayed calm. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but this property is legally mine. I'm happy to let the public use the beach, as required by law, but you can't fence off land that isn't yours. Please respect the court's decision so we can all move forward peacefully." She glared at me for a long moment. Then, without another word, she spun around, got in her car, and sped off in a cloud of dust. I breathed a sigh of relief. Hopefully that was the end of it. I knew Karen would probably keep causing drama, but at least the legal issue was settled. In the following weeks, I started the process of designing my dream beach house. Every time I visited the property, I felt a sense of pride. I had stood up for what was right and protected my investment. The entitled Karen had tried to bully me, but in the end, justice prevailed. It was a hard-fought battle, but so worth it to preserve my little slice of beach paradise. The next one is a petty revenge story. I worked for a company for 6 years that had a lot of members-only and public events. Eventually, I was in charge of promoting these events. I installed my own software on my workstation to make my job easier, and so I wouldn't have to create the artwork and flyers from home. The software was Adobe Photoshop, Acrobat, and InDesign before the Creative Cloud subscription was developed. It wasn't cheap, and I never asked to be reimbursed for it because it made my job easy. When my husband had a motorcycle accident and I was about to miss a lot of work, they set up remote access for me. I could still perform my job from the hospital next to my husband's bedside. The company was sold, and for 2 years, my job never changed. Then one day, the general manager and HR came into my office. He informed me that due to a slowdown in business, I was being laid off effective immediately. I said, "Okay, let me grab my stuff and I'll be off. All I wanted was the stupid stuffed animals that were sitting on my monitor that were gifts from members and my husband. The GM said, "No, we'll get them to you later." Really? They forgot to remove me from remote access to my desktop. I logged into my workstation and uninstalled Adobe Photoshop, Acrobat, and InDesign. I didn't touch anything else. All of my files were left in place. Then I waited. 2 weeks after I was let go, I received a phone call from the assistant GM. She was taking over my duties and needed to finish the artwork for a project that I was working on, but she had problems opening the files. I asked where my stuff was and when could I get it back. She said, "Soon." I told her to buy Photoshop, Acrobat, and InDesign, or she could go online and find some open source software and learn how to use it. I received my stuffed animals a few days later. I don't know how they ever finished my artwork. Side note. I ran into the GM while grocery shopping a month after being laid off. I found a new, better job and was happy. After exchanging pleasantries, I hugged him and thanked him for letting me go. Life is funny that way. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, a little backstory. I work for an internet provider company as a lead in the internet repair department. This means that I get calls from agents who work there that either need help with a situation because they are stuck and don't know what to do, or when a customer escalates the call asking for a supervisor, manager, or someone above them. My department mainly handles internet issues like being offline, outages, replacing equipment, etc. So the other day was like any other. I'm getting calls from agents needing equipment transferred from one account to another, scheduling a technician for customers who refuse to do any troubleshooting. The list goes on and on. One of my main calls is an agent asking for me to run a special tool that corrects the speed being sent to a customer. This usually happens when a customer upgrades or downgrades their internet speed and it doesn't take right away. And this only takes a couple minutes. This comes in later. On this particular day, I get a call from an agent that says her customer wants to speak to a supervisor because he is not getting the speeds he pays for. This happens quite a lot, usually because most people don't understand how the internet works and all the factors that come into the result of a speed test. This can include a lot of things, like how far away you are from your router if you are testing on Wi-Fi or directly connected, how many devices you are currently using, and even things like how your residence is built, because stone and concrete do not allow Wi-Fi signals to travel through. When I looked at the customer's account, I see that he is currently subscribed to 100 megabits per second. Our normal plans are 300, 500, and a gig, which is 1,000. I asked the agent what results he was getting, and she told me it was 437 megabits per second, which is way over what he is paying for. I told the agent to go ahead and transfer him to me, and I'll continue the discussion. Once the customer gets to me, we'll call him Darren. I introduce myself and ask how I can help. Darren immediately begins yelling and cursing at me about how he is not getting what he pays for and is extremely upset, and even demanding credit to his account because of this. I begin to try and apologize to Darren and explain that speed test results can vary based on certain conditions. He cuts me off and states that he is recording the call and will be posting everything I say on social media. I tell him that that is fine, as all our calls are recorded for quality assurance purposes as well, and everything will be documented. Darren then proceeds to continue cursing, stating that this is unacceptable and I should be ashamed of myself for working for a company that does not provide the product people are paying for. While he rants on and on, I noticed that he had recently changed his internet plan from 500 megabits per second to 100 megabits per second 2 days ago. Now, as I mentioned before, sometimes the internet changes don't happen right away, and we have to run a specific tool to fix it. This can happen when the modem has not been reset to reflect these changes. I try to tell Darren that he is receiving more than what he is paying for, and again, he cuts me off stating that he will be reporting us to the FCC BBB and filing a lawsuit about this, all while recording our conversation. Now, normally I wouldn't care, and I'd allow the speed to continue going through until the system automatically fixes it, but his attitude and rude demeanor made me feel otherwise. Cue the malicious compliance. I respond to Darren saying, "Sir, you are absolutely right. And I am so sorry you are not receiving the speeds you are paying for. I will get this fixed right away." Now, this plan that Darren was on, the 100 speed, is a plan that only certain customers can get if they are financially unable to make normal payments, meaning he had to apply for this program and be approved based on his low income. So, I run the fix tool on his internet and reduce the speed down to 100 as he requested. I then ask him how his speed results are now. Darren then responds, "It's even worse than it was before. What kind of trick are you trying to pull on me?" I responded, "Sir, you told me you were not getting the speeds you were paying for, and you were right. You recently applied for financial assistance to be downgraded to 100, and I fixed that for you. It was absolutely wrong of us to be sending you 500 when you were only paying for 100. I apologize for the inconvenience." After a few minutes of silence, Darren then muffled to himself, "This is ridiculous," and proceeded to disconnect the call. I left notes on his account so any future agent would know what had happened that day and that he was not entitled to any credit on his bill. All I can say is, be careful what you complain about. The next one is an entitled people story. Just felt like writing this up for everybody to enjoy. This happened to my best friend, M, somewhere early 30s at that point, about 10 years ago. We'll call him Mark. It happened in Germany. Mark lived in a small apartment building somewhat on the very edge of a large town, but this area was more like a small town or village. Many families. Basically no one passing through. The apartment building held 6 apartments, with Mark living in one, his sister in another, his mother in another, and 3 apartments rented by other people. Also, Mark had been raised in this building, and at that point he had been living there his whole life. Mark loved to, and still does, ride a racing bike. He is an avid cyclist in general, doing much of his early life on a bike for which he has the everyday sort of bike with a basket, etc. Yet he also has owned several very expensive, sometimes custom-made racing bikes over the years on which he spent much of his weekends. Enter a neighbor who had been living there a while, M, around 40. We will call him Dave. Dave had a second-hand bike, a sturdy one but missing some care. At one point, Dave decided that he actually did not need that bike anymore, but there were 2 boys living some houses away, 8, 12 or around that, who had to share one bicycle. So Dave went out to them and told them that he had a bike left, which he had not been using for quite a while. He told them it might be a bit dusty and the tires might be flat. That's what he explained later, and that they can have it. No strings attached except for that they had to get it from his seller, and of course tell their parents about this so there would not be any trouble. He went with them back to the house then, unlocked the door, showed them where to get into the cellar, then left for work. Some hours later, my friend Mark comes home from work and sees 2 boys he knows from his neighborhood on bikes, one of which is clearly his rather expensive, say 2,500 euro, racing bike. He stops them in the road and demands they hand over his bike. They don't want to, claiming it's theirs, and that it was a present from neighbor Dave. Mark tells them that it certainly was not, because this bike belongs to him, not Dave. Hence, Dave can't have gifted it to them. They call him a liar and want to take off with the bike, but Mark holds firm to the handlebar and tells them he will call the police if they do not hand over the bike this very instant. The boys get scared and run away with their own bike. Mark takes his bike back to his apartment, checks it, and finds that the boys obviously used it like it was a mountain bike, so he knew he had to repair some things and it would probably be costly. He hears Dave coming home. They lived on the same floor. Leaves his apartment and tells Dave about what happened. Dave is very embarrassed and apologetic, and assures Mark that he specifically told the boys that his bike was an older model, dusty and probably with flat tires, and that he has absolutely no idea they could mistake his bike for a brand new, gleaming racing bike. The thing that most likely happened was, the boys entered the cellar after Dave had let them. The bicycles were all in a room down there, but this is an old building. There was nothing to lock them to, and after living in that place for so many years and never having a single issue of any foul play, Mark had never thought about locking his bikes together or putting a lock around wheel and frame or something. Down there, however, the boys were in the midst of some bikes, many of which might have been too tall, or looked like a woman's, or just didn't meet their taste. Ignoring Dave's explanation of how the bike they were gifted would look, the boys decided to take the only bike from down there. That was definitely very new and flashing, and that was definitely by far the best horse in the stable. One could have ended the tale here if entitled kids were not often met by entitled parents. Because on the same evening, the boy's dad showed up demanding that Mark hand over the bicycle his boys had been gifted. Mark tried to explain what most likely had happened, phrasing it that the boys mistook the bicycles, but Dad did not listen. Once they were down in the cellar accompanied by Dave, who did his best to explain too, Mark and Dave pointed out the gifted bike, only for Dad to say, "No, that is not it. Where's the racing bike?" They explained again. Dad still demanded the racing bike. They explained again. Dad said that he did not buy their story. His sons had been gifted a racing bike, and they would get it this very moment, or Dad would call the police. That's when both Mark and Dave started laughing and kicked him out, but not without the information that Mark's bike was not only registered with the police and the manufacturer as his, not Dave's, but also insured under his name. Hence, Dave could not have gifted the bike to the boys, but that they would look forward to Dad calling the police because that would end with Mark reporting his boys for theft and for damaging his bike and their father for coercion. Dad left in a hurry. After fixing the damages on his bike, Mark put an envelope into the family's mailbox detailing the costs, if I recall correctly it was around €300, and writing that children make mistakes, and that he will not demand the money back, but to let this be a warning to Dad to think about his behavior. The following years, in which the family lived down the road, the boys and father would make sure to avoid Mark, and if they could not, they greeted him very nicely, but never looked him in the eye. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.